Thundergrunt.
Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show that treats the final edit of a movie like the script. Today, we're going to talk about Candyman, a movie directed by Bernard Rose, which is, of course, my uncle.
Wow.
No, I'm kidding. Anyway, we're going to introduce ourselves. Go around and say who you are, guys.
No.
I am.
Oh.
And bye. That was a great episode. No.
Yeah, see you guys. I am Jimmy George. I am a full-time script consultant and screenwriter. My Twitter handle is @JimmyRGeorge.
And I am Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter, and that's a lawnmower outside my house. I'm a screenwriter, writer of Save the Cat Rights for TV, which you can purchase right now. Go buy it.
And I am Bob Rose, and I didn't get much sleep, but we're going to have a great time anyway, because I watched Candyman twice for this episode.
Wow.
Yeah.
Me too.
Just don't watch it 5 times in the mirror.
Yeah. I stared in a mirror. I had the movie playing in a mirror, and I watched it, and then I said his name whenever they said it. Didn't get a great night's sleep. But yeah, so we're going to talk about the 1992 original Candyman. Just to be, it's, anyone listening should already know that, but I just want to make that clear. And none of us at this moment has even seen the reboot, right?
Yeah.
Just to be clear for everyone listening.
No.
Yeah, we're all newborn babies that have not seen the light.
I have seen the Sammy Davis Jr. biopic, Candyman.
Oh.
No, I don't even think that exists. I just made it up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was like, oh wow, I didn't know he was known as that.
Yeah,
have you seen every Willy Wonka movie?
Because
they're rebooting it again.
it's a
prequel.
I was gonna say, I only know of 2 of them, so I think there was one other one, but I can't.
There is
remember.
only 2. I was just kidding.
Okay.
Anyway, Candyman. We're going to talk about Candyman, the 1992 film. Jamie, who wrote this shit?
Jordan Peele. No, I'm just kidding. This guy named, it's Bob's uncle,
Yep.
Bernard Rose, and
it's actually Bernard.
is it Bernard?
Yeah, that's
it's
how,
Bernard.
that's how
Yeah,
they're
it
all
is.
Figures I finally get an easy name.
I think I butchered it first, though, Jamie, so it's okay.
I mean, I had no idea. I call him Bernie.
Bernie.
We can call him
Bernie
Bernie.
Rose.
I spent
Bernie
a
Rose.
weekend.
Uncle
I spent
Bernie.
a weekend at Bernie's. So
My uncle Bernard Rose, and then my cousin Emily Rose. A lot of horror in my family. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
and truth is, Bernie has an interesting. He's got an interesting credit list here. It's weird. I have IMDb Pro, so it gives me like a lot of weird credits. Like he was a fake Shemp in Army of Darkness, which is like awesome.
That's incredible.
Yeah. He directed a movie, one of Bob's favorite movies, Chicago Joe and the Showgirl.
Sure, yeah. I love that film. I don't think I've ever seen it.
And then a movie I know Jimmy has a T-shirt of the Paper House.
Paper House. I've actually never seen it, but always wanted to.
Okay. And Body Contact, Smart Money, movies that I personally haven't seen, actually.
So he's more of an art house filmmaker. I think a lot of this stuff was they were mostly flops at the box office. Like Anna Karina was taken away from him. I read that in research. And I think I was even telling Jamie earlier, like after Candyman, which is kind of his one, looking at his IMDb, is kind of his one hit. they kicked him out of the franchise because his sequel that he wrote didn't have Candyman in it. It actually was about Jack the Ripper, and it had a passing, like somebody passingly said something about Candyman, but then the whole script was about Jack the Ripper. And they were like, "What are you doing?" Because they wanted their own Freddy Krueger, or so, you know what I mean. And so he got kicked out, and then Hollywood kind of never came back. And apparently, he made some movie called Ivan's XTC in 2000. Which was apparently a direct attack on Hollywood producers. So
So I listened to the commentary. It's the Scream. I don't have the Scream Factory. I have the original DVD commentary. So there's only one. The Scream Factory one is like jam packed. There's 4 different commentaries, like crazy. I know. And he says that he has had he talks about his problems with trying to develop movies that he deemed like were aiming to be of the quality of Candyman. And he's complaining on the commentary about hitting a wall in the development because no one's willing to let him like tell a story that's as graphic and scary as Candyman. He's like, they're always trying to hit me with a PG-13. Like they're trying to push back. Like, this is too scary. This is too gory. This is too real. This is too painful. Like, and so it sounds like between what you're describing and what he's describing that like he's never really been given the freedom that he was given on this one.
Yeah. I think also I was saying to Jamie, we were talking about how odd Candyman is. I mean, we're going to talk more in depth about the script, but I think a lot of the oddities and which gives it its own voice and makes it unique is from him. A bit because I was reading an interview with him and he was saying he was kind of attacking like 3-act structure and saying how they wouldn't let him play in his own sandbox, that he had to play by the rules and he didn't like that. So I think a lot, and he's not like a horror movie guy. Like if you look at the rest of his career, it's not this. Like it's funny that he's known for this, but it's not really the majority of the stuff. So I think any weirdness or any difference.
And I'll say like if you. I love listening to him like talk about writing horror and telling horror stories. Like his insight and like perspective is very, very instructive. Like the things he was saying on there. So I highly recommend. That's not what this episode is about, but like he goes into depth about like his choices.
I mean, he's the one who decided to set the movie where it's set and to change him, change the race of the villain.
Yeah, which brings us to the other creator of this movie.
Exactly, yeah.
Mr. Clive Barker. Sir Clive Barker.
Who? No.
Yeah, so this was one of... I don't remember which volume, and I really should have looked that up, but this was one of the Books of Blood stories. If you've never heard of the Books of Blood, they're a collection of short stories. I think they were like 6, 7, 8 of them. I was a huge fan of these when I was like in 7th grade. I remember one Christmas where I got like 3 of them and I read them all Christmas. So that shows you where my brain was. And I read this, years ago. Honestly, of all the books,
the Forbidden, you mean?
The Forbidden, it was called. And the Forbidden was like 100-page novella short story that was part of the Books of Blood. I remember at the time it didn't make an impression on me to the point when Candyman came out, I went back and reread it just to see, and then I vaguely remembered it. But the Forbidden, it actually structurally has a lot of similarities for a short story. It's not like Shawshank where it's like one little scene and they made a whole movie out of it or something like that. There's motion at my door. It's Candyman. He's here. So Candyman would be a good voice on your Amazon Alexa. Like,
I mean, Tony Todd's his voice is so epic and amazing. Yes.
Yeah, it would be awesome. We should get that.
Yeah.
For Halloween, that'd be awesome. So the structure is relatively similar. It's about a woman investigating graffiti in the short story. She's not investigating urban legends. she goes into Liverpool. It's Liverpool, so it's more like the poor. You know, she's like this academia person that's going into a poor kind of area and investigating this urban legend. Well, she, again, not urban legend, but graffiti about this stuff. And ultimately, a lot of similar things happen. However, a lot of things don't happen. A lot of the backstory was made up. Of course, the setting, of course, changed, which also necessitated it just has it has a whole different when they changed the setting. That's how Tony Todd casting a black villain and kind of having the racial component came into play when they changed the setting. But I think those were otherwise the structure is sort of the same. There's even a if I'm remembering correctly, there's even a funeral pyre of trash and it burns. I think it ends a little differently. I think the ending, maybe the baby dies or something, or, you know, so there's some subtle differences, but it's surprisingly similar. The villain is totally different. He's wearing this patchwork of rainbow colored jacket or something.
Technicolor dream coat.
Yeah, it's kind of a, I don't know, a little bit weirder. It feels like Kubrickian or something. I don't know. He's kind of the strange villain. But it does have some similarities. But I do think the story, while keeping true to the short, the film adds a lot of cool stuff, makes it it pluses it in a lot of ways. And that's what's kind of fascinating about it, because it does just come and it adds all these ornaments on it to kind of turn it into a bigger feature film. But I think it actually does it makes some great choices and makes the story richer than the short story was. The short story was just kind of this blast of a story that, if you ever read Clive Barker, a lot of it's in the poetry of how he writes. It's a lot of it is almost like a poem in some ways. So a lot of it was just in the execution of how he wrote it is what's really memorable about it. But the movie kind of adds some other layers to it, other themes, and just kind of higher levels of execution, in my opinion.
And he did talk about Clive Barker's on that commentary too, and he talked about the bonfire being distinctly British and being kind of like the one thing that remained in the screenplay version that was specific to the British culture. And it's about Guy Fawkes, and apparently on the 5th of November they make these huge bonfires, and it's about like ritual destruction of the monster. And
it works really good in the film because of the location.
Yeah,
I was like, having an abandoned field, I would never question it at all because of the abandoned field and all the trash. I was like,
absolutely,
it totally works. Yeah,
and they set it up. They do a great job. They plant the seed early on. She sees it. She's like, what is that? The kid tells her, like, so they do a great job of making it like organic. But it was interesting that he also, Clive said on the commentary that Cabrini Green is exactly what he pictured, except in Liverpool. He said the situation is very similar. It's a bunch of people who, they don't have housing projects there that are the same as what we have, but there's a bunch of people who were poor, like you just explained, Jamie, that the culture had kind of like put into their own ghetto in order to try to like get rid of crime and solve problems of society. But then that created its own system of violence and oppression. So he's like, there's images in the movie that almost exactly are like what he pictured, because he's been to places in Liverpool and knows people who live in this situation in Liverpool. So
it's almost like the movie expanded a short about classism and adding the race. It added it to the American story of that. Our own shame,
ancestral sins. Yes.
Right.
Yes. There's some other things too, like the Candyman, saying Candyman 5 times. That was an added thing that was added. Probably
that's a genius thing to add.
I mean, it's kind of the hook of the whole thing, right?
Yeah,
it's the trailer. Now,
he said Bernard Rose said it was 13 originally to be exactly like Bloody Mary, and he said they did the first table read, and like the actor was just sitting there saying Candyman 13 times, and everybody at the table was like, "This is ridiculous."
That sounds like something you'd have in Scary Movie, like the Wayans brothers.
Yeah.
If you say Candyman 76 times,
and
then you'd actually do it, and they would be like, and the crowd would just be like, "Ah!"
You guys, I mean, this is a conceptual thing, so it's sort of writing, but do you find it odd that it's 5? I always found it odd that it was 5, because you always think 3 or 7. 3 or 7.
Yeah.
3 or 7 is usually the number for that kind of stuff, and 5 is odd to me.
Builds tension, though.
It does. No, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just, the fact that it wasn't 3, I guess they don't want to be Beetlejuice.
Yeah, probably. That might have been a
the choice.
We can't make it like Beetlejuice.
Is this post Beetlejuice? I am trying to remember.
Yeah, Beetlejuice is the 80s. So this is a 90s movie.
Okay. Because the other thing, when I first heard about the mirror thing for us, and I don't know where you stand with the saying something in the mirror. Of course, Bloody Mary is the popular one, but locally, Black Aggie was actually the one we used to say. If you said Black Aggie 3 times in the mirror or 5 times, I don't remember the number, which might have saved my life because they only said it 3. So if you said Black Aggie was this creepy statue that if you Google, was in a graveyard over in the Woodlawn Cemetery. I think it's moved since then.
We're talking about Maryland for anyone listening.
Maryland.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this local urban legend, and that was where it came from here. So when I started to see these, say it 5 times, I was like, oh, that's just like Black Aggie. And then realizing it was Bloody Mary and Beetlejuice, and there's a long history.
It's a urban legend history, right? And that will come into play in this discussion, I believe, right?
Yeah, tapping into what we're already scared of.
Much like the hook hand is something straight out of urban legends as well.
Exactly.
And I so the other thing I wanted to add with the mirror aspect is, in reading, I realized that the mirror, there was an incident, a murder that was very similar to that, where somebody came through a mirror, murdered somebody. So that whole thing where the mirror led to the other part of the building, if you removed it, and somebody came through and killed somebody, and there was a whole murder that they kind of also incorporated into the storyline.
Yeah,
seemingly.
Yeah, they made that, they built everything off that. Feels like that's.
Yeah, it might.
It happens twice in the movie too, right? There's 2 different mirror portals in the movie, right?
Yeah, it might. I don't even know, and I don't know if they say in the commentary what came first. Where? How did he tackle on the mirror thing? Was it that he heard about these murders, and then the urban legend came, or the urban legend was there, and he was thinking about mirrors, and then he saw the
Jamie, we're all from the same area, so we can't say. But I'm sure people from other areas have a looking in the mirror saying a name. Urban legend.
Oh, for sure.
It probably wasn't. It probably was just retrofitted to every area, had their own Black Aggie or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's a normal thing.
Yeah. No. What I'm saying is, when he was adapting the short story, was it that he came at it and said, "I want to add this talking in the mirror thing, like Bloody Mary or whatever."
Yeah.
Or did he hear about this murder case and oh, I want to add that into it somehow? I wanted to put this murder where somebody comes through, the building, and then he was like, you know what that reminds me of? I'm almost wondering,
where the idea generation came from. Yeah, he didn't specify in that.
Okay.
Yeah, he did say that the Bloody Mary, inspiration
that might be the answer.
Came from when he was studying in Chicago to change the story to be Chicago specific. So.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Also the setting of those apartments. I mean, when she took the mirror off the wall and stuff, I was like, you know what? I mean, it fits the setting, how they build these apartments. The fact that the mirror makes a thinner part to go to the other thin-walled apartments. I was like, it's so simple. Yeah. Everything works. So it could have just been that. It could have given them the idea.
It's true.
Yeah, just the actual setting. Yeah.
By the way, there's a book for anyone who's interested in learning more about Cabrini Green.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called There Are No Children Here that just happened to come out at the exact same. It just happened to be in development at the same time as Candyman, 1991. It is about the Chicago projects, and it is a biographical following the lives of children and their parents in these housing projects where Candyman takes place. And it is like one of the best books I've ever read, and sort of like it mirrors the horror that that this movie explores supernaturally. It's a very good book.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for anyone listening, like there's like documentaries on. I've even watched a few for this episode about Cabrini Green. Like, we don't have to go through it, but
yeah,
I watched like the history of it and what actually happened. It's all,
oh man,
like, I don't know if people know that that's like a real place, with an actual history that is as messed up as the movie
portrays it to be.
It's a real thing. It was not created for the movie. It's a real thing with real history in Chicago.
And if I remember, and this is kind of what differentiates this movie in a lot of these weird independent ways, like, I think they shot some of it there.
All of it. Except for Candyman's. Everything was.
You broke up a bit, Jimmy.
Like practical, like on. All of the Cabrini Green footage was filmed there on location, except for Candyman's lair. So it was like authentic.
So even the interiors of the apartments and things like that were filmed there as well.
Mm-hmm. Like that, that bathroom was Cabrini Green bathroom. So you're saying, holy crap.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So it's like this movie's really like thick on like location scouting. Like, they found location and they went deep.
Yeah, I think that's what stands out to me in this movie is you can feel that kind of stuff. It's
in the script too.
Different. Yeah, and then even casting, like Virginia Madsen, is a different kind of person to cast in a movie like this at the time. I think it just felt different. There's just all kinds of weird or good, not weird in a good way, execution choices that happen all throughout this movie, even beyond the script. There's just lots of really cool stuff.
No, Bob and I were talking about this before. Is like, we could spend the entire episode talking about the filmmaking, and that's like, we try so hard not to do that on this podcast, but it's such a great, like, well made on all aspects of the filmmaking craft. Like, oh my god. Like, I left the movie going when I was revisiting it for this episode, like, I so want to talk about everything else.
Yeah,
like the score and the performances and the production design and oh my god.
Yeah, like how you talked in the past about the terror versus dread, Jamie. I was gonna say, like, the craft of the filmmaking, maybe not so much the writing. I don't know where I would put it, but like this movie is just like pure dread to me. I don't know why. Like, the air, even when there's nothing happening, it's scary. I'm like, ugh, I feel not okay. Like there's just like this feeling, and it's the music, scenery, everything. I don't know. It's just
Philip Glass score. It's
it's just amazing. Right.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that stuff.
Yeah. No. And again, a kind of auteur director who's really viewing this as an important movie. You know what I mean? Not just like
it's not like. Yeah, it's not Nightmare on Elm Street like 7 or something. Which not knocking that either, but like, you know what I mean? To him, he doesn't view it as like he was making a new slasher movie. He was making a movie,
right,
that he viewed as just as like, rich as like Shakespeare to him. Yep. And I think that shows. I
agree.
Yeah. But I think that also brings us to talking about horror story construction, right, guys?
Yes. So I have a list of questions that I from my clients and help them kind of hone in on their horror premise. And a lot of the questions on this have come from like things we've learned doing the show. Like when we've done the horror episodes, we've sort of kind of honed in on what makes a good horror movie. And it's also been built out of my own efforts with my frequent partner, Chris LaMartina, in our efforts to like write a horror story, idea generation. And then also I've probably read like 100 horror scripts, amateur horror scripts that are missing a lot of like the core details you need to tell a good story like Candyman. So I thought it might be interesting to go through these questions and kind of show how Candyman answers these questions in a way that makes it specific to this story. And when you put all of those details together, it sort of informs why it's so long lasting and timeless and just like continues to like entertain audiences now and probably for years to come. So, okay, here we go. There's 7 questions, but the first one is kind of like a 5-parter. And you guys kind of just like chime in as I go and tell me what you think, if anything comes to mind from other movies and things like that.
Sure.
So the first big question, most important, is your killers, monsters, horror threat mythology, right? You're crafting the mythology of the character. And the reason I say horror threat, because sometimes it's like a virus, right? Sometimes the horror threat isn't even like an actual creature being. It's like it's a microscopic thing. So I just kind of
really, what's that like?
Oh,
yeah.
Like we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So first part in that question in creating the mythology is, what is their appearance? What does it look like?
This is the crafting the action figure, right? What does the killer
look like? Well, in this one, crafting, this is very much like the action figure exercise we've talked about in other things. I almost did the action figure but this is sort of the same thing. We have a tall, statuesque black man. He's very specific looking. He's got a long coat with a fur trim that Tony Todd said when they chose this, it made him feel like he's royalty, like he's a king, right? The hook for a hand, like you said, Jamie, that taps into the Hook urban legend. So it's like very specific to this idea of an urban legend supernatural killer. The weaponized honey against him, which caused the killer bees to kill him, which is like a symbol of privilege at the time when he was killed, right? Like they used
having honey, right?
Right. They weaponized privilege against him. So it's not just that it's cool; it's that it's got it's thematic. And the beast wounds and the rotted rib cage fill the bees. Those are all very memorable things and specific to the character. So the second question that I often ask is, okay, what's their backstory? Well, this one's like really rich, and they did a great job. They have that character who's like the snobby asshole professor. He's like,
right.
Oh, you don't know the story. What's important is Candyman is a good person who became a monster like through no fault of his own, right? Like he's
not Freddy Krueger,
right? Like he's the opposite.
He's the opposite. Yeah.
Yes, that's important because that informs how we feel about him, right? Mm-hmm. He was a free man. He was a highly educated, wealthy painter who was hired by white people to paint rich white people. And his dad was a slave, but managed to earn a fortune through a shoe invention, which they kind of go into. And this was from Tony Todd, and I love this. Tony Todd said he thought he could live a sheltered and separate life from the racist world that he was living in, but he discovered that he couldn't avoid racism. It was always going to be a threat to him. And he fell in love with a white woman and got punished publicly. They lynched him. They sawed off his painting arm. They stole hives and smeared honey all over him and stung him to death. And then they burned him publicly and scattered his ashes on the land that Cabrini Green was built over. So talk about a rich, specific...
talk about a legend, right?
Specific to this world and to the themes that we're going to dig into.
Also a backstory where you could believe you're creating a monster. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you hear that and you're like, of course they're going to come back.
Right. That's
atrocious in every level.
I mean, how... You believe, like you said, you believe that like if there was such a thing as a ghost that was going to haunt people and a place, this is the one. This is right?
It, yeah.
Based on that rich backstory. So like just it's very instructive how specific these things are. You know, they're not, if you pop this backstory into another movie, it's not going to work. It works in this movie. Because like what I read a lot is I'll read a lot of stories that have a rich backstory for the character, but like you could place it in any setting, and then the script never does anything with the setting itself. It's just sort of like this cool killer with a cool backstory, but it's not specific. It's just like generic. Okay, the next question I ask is, what is their modus operandi? What is their weapon or tactic of choice? And what's important, just like Freddy Krueger, to think about like Freddy Krueger, is these can be physical or they can be like psychological, like in a dream. It doesn't have to be in the real world. We have three very cool things that are specific to Candyman. You say Candyman, his name
five times right.
In the mirror, he shows up. His 5 times. His kills are all hook specific. Like he kills everyone with a hook, and sometimes the bees too. He uses hypnosis on his victims, so he's like mind control is like one of his powers. So there you have like 3 very specific things. And then the next important question is their personality. Do they have a voice, or are they silent? And if they have a voice, why do they have a voice? Like, how does it inform the character? Well, he was like a highly educated man in the 1800s. So he speaks like with this deep, elegant 1900s, voice. Yeah. And it's like, it informs everything about what happened to him, informs the voice. It's not just like they were like, well, what are we going to have him talk like? Well, I don't know. He's going to say some scary stuff. Like he speaks exactly like his character would have spoken if he came from that time.
I didn't listen to the commentary, but I got to assume that and then that was part of the casting of Tony Todd, right?
The theatrical aspect, of his theatrical background,
You're right. Like, I didn't, like I said, I didn't listen to the commentary, but I got to assume that what you're saying right there is they needed a voice. They can actually execute what they wrote.
But that stuff was in the script. Yeah, execute what they wrote. Exactly what you said. And also, Jamie, we didn't do the rooting influencers for this one, but I bet if we sat down like we did with the Gremlins, we could find like our list of like rooting resume for Candyman and why he's interesting and why you kind of like him, even though you're scared of him. You know, like
his backstory is full of rooting resume material. You know, he's been betrayed by the world. An unjust thing has happened to him. All kinds of things like that go down with him.
That's a good point.
He's a big underdog.
The backstory itself. Yeah. He's a big underdog, even though he's.
And like you said, I think pointing out that he was good is important.
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah, right? It's not Jason or Freddy or even Chucky.
Right.
Who all were bad. Right. Yeah.
Right. He became a monster. It wasn't his fault. And I think that's what makes him very interesting. So here's another one that I think is important. We've talked about this in past horror episodes. What are the signals that your monster threat is near? What is your shark fin in Jaws? Mm-hmm. What is your predator rattle? What is your Jurassic Park dinosaurs vibrating the water? In this, we have some very specific ones. We have, if anytime there's a mirror on screen, you instantly know that danger is near.
Right.
And bees, anytime bees are on screen, there's a sign that like Candyman might be coming up to kill you. That's why you said, Bob, like the Dread, they have all these moments where they just plant the seeds of his, like they have their shark fin, right?
Right.
And even just saying his name, even when they're in casual situations that they're not standing in front of a mirror, just saying his name, since if you say his name too many times, every time somebody says Candyman in the movie, it's like, ooh, don't say it again.
Can I say also, while we're here talking about this, like, I think what's interesting about the movie is it has that like opening scene with the very gorgeous Ted Raimi, and that it sets that up, and that sets it up as very precise. Like you say it, he shows up and kills you. but I feel like that's the urban legend in the movie, and then in the actual meat of the movie, I've never felt, as many times as I've seen this, I've never felt like I know exactly what's going to happen. There's sort of a Lovecraftian element to Candyman where it's like you say the name and then like he's sort of going to haunt you at random.
It's sort of arbitrary.
It's arbitrary. Like he does his own thing. He doesn't follow the urban legend precisely. He doesn't just show up. He's like, he's going to do his own thing.
It's not The Ring where it's like in 5 days, he'll come and kill you.
It's not precise at all. Yeah. Like you said,
and I love that.
Yeah, but, I dig that.
But there is that precision, like definitive if you do this. So it's like it almost makes him even more. You're
opening a doorway to him if you do it. I'm just saying, like, it doesn't exactly happen like the urban legend they tell in the movie.
Yeah.
It's not like instant. It's not like, oh, there he is. It's just like, like she didn't do that. And he didn't show up to kill those people like that.
Yeah.
In fact, he's slaying people adjacent to her.
Yeah. No, that's true.
It's different than what we were told at the beginning of the movie.
That makes it scarier and unpredictable.
Yeah, because we're told something and then it doesn't deliver on that exact premise.
Yeah. I love that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so now into the next part of the horror questionnaire. And we've talked about not just in horror, but in general of crafting a premise. Why here? Why does this story have to take place in this specific setting? And how is this horror character specific to this setting you're choosing? Right? Cabrini Green, what was actually labeled in 1991 when they started filming this as the worst place to live in America, which is why Bernard Rose chose it, based on its reputation. So it's like a modern version of a haunted house. And
for white people.
For white people. Well, for the people who for the people who live there, but also too.
There's an element of like the outsider, the class system, actually. The outsider looking in
No, exactly. They're tapping into exactly what you just said.
Yeah, the fears of like the rural area of white people going to the city, and all that.
Don't get stuck in the wrong place in town.
Don't even drive by it as kind of the phobia, let alone go inside. You're only asking for trouble, so to speak. It's preying.
And that is like
on
that's like a haunted house. That's like like the house in It or something, where the kids aren't even supposed to stop in front of it with their bikes.
Yeah. Don't stop in front of that house, the creepy house at the end of the street. Right. That's kind of the way it's portrayed. It's the big castle or creepy.
And this is a whole area. It's a district. Right. Yeah,
exactly. But all of this is rooted in our like ancestral racism. Right.
Exactly.
From it's like how, so it is so specific and so perfect for what the Candyman monster is that like it's a great instructive example of choosing a setting that's going to inform all the horror that happens. Why now? This why now is a little loose. Why now? Why do these deaths have to happen now at this specific period in the story world as opposed to any other time? Well,
it's the character's
find
fault,
this out
right?
Until like 45 minutes in. Right. He tells her, I don't think this is very measurable, but it works. Rewatching it, I don't think for like the first 45 minutes you're going like, oh no, she's questioning the reality of Candyman, and now all this nobody believes him, and I don't see that. But
to mention Army of Darkness, or more specifically Evil Dead again, like that movie happens because they go to the cabin and read a book.
Yeah,
the characters do it.
Yeah,
and that's okay. The characters can be dumb and do something.
Yeah.
She shouldn't have done what she did.
It's as simple as that.
She committed a sin, right, Jamie? We've talked about that a few times on this. There's the sin of the movie, and then
what an amazing segue, because that's the next question.
Is that the next one? Hell yeah! See, I'm almost listening to you guys when you talk now.
Jamie, I want you to take the reins here. I'm going to ask the question, and you can kind of like explain the concept. What is the literal or figurative sin that brings about the monster in your story?
You broke up a little there.
Talk about it.
Jimmy, you broke up a little there. Can you read that again?
What is the literal or figurative sin of this story that brings about the monster?
Yeah, in this movie, it's I I mean, there's a couple different ones you can kind of pick from, but one is it disrespect or disbelief of the urban legend to an extent that brings it
there's
about?
a loose. Yeah, I think that's part of it. It's kind of loose.
She doesn't believe in the supernatural. There's that.
Right. And she's also sort of, I don't know, this is where this movie gets a little tricky for me, because there's like several different themes running at the same time. The sin that brings about the monster is his backstory to an extent, and it's
racism.
It's the racism.
Yeah.
The sin that brings it into her life is sort of the disrespect of the urban legend, the disbelief, the I can use this for my thesis project and not care, or something like that. And which is a it's almost like a trope of horror. It's kind of the Blair Witch Project dabbles in that.
Does it get weird for you because it turns out that she has a personal connection to it in some way?
It does get weird.
Is that why you're talking about that?
That's why it kind of gets there's some strangeness. Like honestly, this movie is very Lovecraftian. Lovecraft has a lot of stories about some investigator who goes into something and they don't have the full respect for the unknown, and they stare into the abyss and the abyss stares back at them, right? But then this movie puts the Dracula spin. It's very goth horror in some ways, gothic horror, where it's like, you and I were destined to be together, which almost negates her staring in the mirror and saying Candyman 5 times. If they were destined to do it, she probably didn't even have to do that. And there's part of me that even wonders if that part of the rules is even important, because he doesn't come right away and kill her. He doesn't even kill her. Right. He tries to make her choose to be with him and sacrifice herself. So there's a lot of weirdness in this movie.
And every time I've ever watched it as an adult, I've always wondered if it wasn't whoever woke him up for the first time in a long time, if it was another woman, would he have given her the same treatment? Like, did his own legend retrofit to her, or is she actually like a descendant?
Right.
I don't know. I don't have an answer.
They mentioned on the commentary the intentional ambiguity of that.
Right. So they want us to be questioning it. That's,
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's an interesting choice, that there's no definitive answer.
Right.
But I think to sum up your answer, the sin is really that backstory. That's what brings the monster into existence. That she commits her own sin of sort of disrespecting and disbelief, which is touched upon by him. Like, he kind of complains, he says something to her along the lines of, "You've destroyed my congregation with your, and now I need you to resurrect it or whatever by committing the sacrifice." It's all a little murky.
It is.
But so that's why I'm split on where the sin is exactly. Like sometimes those two are tied together. Right. Sometimes the hero is innocent, but that sin that happens is just like the sins of the past, kind of like Poltergeist when they wipe away the stones. It's the family is sort of complicit, but he didn't even know. He was like, I didn't know we did that. You guys did that. So it can be a little, but there's always a sin involved in some way.
Yeah. That's one thing that we've noticed that tracks. It tracks, man.
Bingo.
Yeah. That there is a sin. It makes the movie better, the horror movie better when there is. And I think here, like you said, Jamie, like, it's loose, but the ancestral and systemic racism is there. It's definitely there. It's definitely part of it.
That part isn't loose at all.
No, that's not loose at all.
No, the thing that created the monster was that. It's just the thing that brings it into her life. Is she an innocent, or then do we have a second sin that's kind of committed? That's sort of this.
It's almost like your double bump catalyst,
Yeah. And again, it's very much a trope. Like, oh, I don't believe in the haunted house. Let's go to it, and then you pay the price, right?
I want to ask you guys something too that I don't want to derail this conversation or your track, Jimmy. But
no, it's fine.
Something watching this for this show, watching her character and what you're talking about, she's committing the original sin, and I was thinking that when you watch the movie, she doesn't come off great. Honestly, her character doesn't come off great, and I was like, then I was realizing that her B storyline with her husband, which is in there, arguably could be excised even. I was like, do you think they wrote that as a counterpoint to give her sympathy? To make us not like think she is a complete, like she's nothing but like disrespectful hubris. Like because she doesn't, like, if you took that husband storyline out, I feel like there's not much to like about her.
So they, Jamie,
you know what I mean?
Jamie, you can bounce off me here. I wrote this down off the commentary. Just a little bit. So he made a very interesting note about his choice with Helen and the crafting of Helen. Bernard. He said, if he's telling a horror story, and I want to hear what you guys think. He said when he's telling a horror story, he doesn't think it's impactful to have a character who's the lead in the horror situation with like a rich backstory, because he said if you give a character who's like your main lead in the horror a bunch of stuff to be delving into from their backstory, that instead of experiencing the horror and constantly being in the present and trying to survive and trying to figure out the situation, it gives the audience too much time away from the horror itself and focusing on the internals of the person who's experiencing the horror. And so he was basically saying, like, he made Helen she's not one-dimensional, but he intentionally...
She's like a surrogate for the audience.
He intentionally kept her simple. He used the word simple many times when describing Helen. That was what he says is why the movie is like scary. So it's very interesting. I've never heard anybody say that. He was basically saying, I made her simple because it's scarier that she's simple.
I guess I'm not disagreeing. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm saying that I feel like the added storyline was a counterbalance to how simple she is and how bad she comes off. She comes off bad. She doesn't, like, you know what I mean? If you took out that storyline, there's really not. I don't have a lot of sympathy for her, I think. You know what I mean?
She reminds me, and not to harp on Blair Witch again, but she reminds me of Heather a little bit. You know,
she's a lot like Heather. Yeah.
She's got a mission. She's going to do it. That's really all she cares about. You know, it's like her mission.
It's very similar, Jamie. Actually, when you think about it, like her motivation is almost exactly the same. She's trying to solve a mystery. She's trying to succeed in her academics, right? Because isn't Heather making a student film?
Yep.
And she's trying to prove that the Candyman. Originally, she's trying to prove that the Candyman is like people doing this, and that isn't like a supernatural figure. And then eventually she's trying to prove the existence of the supernatural figure. Yeah.
But Heather doesn't have a counterbalance to her.
Yeah.
Heather doesn't have like, oh, but you know, her husband's cheating on her. Like, so you should also feel bad for her. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I think part of that is the realism of the Blair Witch. You know, we don't have this crappy backstory shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. What I'm saying is,
I don't think
Candyman, it just feels so intentional to me now when I watch it. I'm like, this seems like they were trying to give her something.
I think,
go ahead.
I think it gives her motivation for her obsession, because it gives her
motivation for the turn at the end.
Yeah, well, also because she's trying to impress them. You know, she wants to be like them. She wants to be. They kind of discount her like the little kid at the table, and she's like, "No, I have a thesis, and I'm going to prove it. And I'm going to show these people."
And that's enough, right?
Oh no, I meant her. Okay, I was talking about something different. I meant like her husband finally just. He's moved on. It gives her that last moment. She said, "You're all I had left," and then she goes to Candyman. You know what I mean? That it's functional.
Yeah.
It's just there's something. Yeah.
Well, bouncing off what you're saying, Bob, there was more that they shot with the love story that didn't end up in the movie. I actually think what you're describing was like the setup for the reversal. So when he goes to her, when Helen goes to Candyman's lair and he's sleeping there, the original scene, they shot it it's not on the DVD I have, but maybe it's on the Shout Factory Blu-ray. They went to ballroom dancing classes together, Tony Todd and Virginia Madsen. It's this big, sweeping, 3-minute long culmination of a love story, of a forbidden love story, where he dances as like a Beauty and the Beast element. They dance all around the lair to like, you know, Philip Glass score, and she declares her love for him, and like they kiss. And it's like this culminating reversal, because she's like a woman who they set up who's not experiencing love, right? She's yearning for someone to like love her. And then here's the Candyman who's like, we can be eternal monsters forever, you know, just like Dracula.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's there. It feels like not fully realized, because the plan was to fully realize it, but the studio nixed it.
Right. Well, I'm fine with the end result of that, like the turn she takes when she realized she lost everything. But up until then, I'm like, I felt like it was almost extraneous. Like, I was like, you're just trying to make me feel something for her. You know, I'm saying this now as I watch it for this show. You know, like, I don't think you need it until that end turn, really. You know, but that's all I was trying to say.
But it does serve a
we were talking about the original sin. That's why I brought it up. Is she doesn't come off well. And I felt like the script was balancing that out with giving her a sympathetic story.
Something.
Like if you take away her husband cheating on her, then she just seems like a reporter who has hubris and commits the sin and doesn't respect these people or what this all means, you know?
Right. Yeah. There's not much there to like. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's not much to love. Yeah. Not much to like about her.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I was trying to say.
It's true.
Yeah. I derailed it a bit, but
no. Originally I was going to talk about the love story with you guys and see what you guys think, because it's weird. It's really weird.
It's very weird. Yeah.
I think that's where, and we'll get into this when we talk a little bit about structure. That's where this movie seems like a hodgepodge of like 3 different movies kind of smushed together a little bit to me. And I think the love story is the one that takes over in the end, but it kind of comes in at late. It's like it shows up like late in the game and then plays out, as opposed it's like half of the movie has nothing to do with that, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, let's flip the Beauty and the Beast switch. You know, it just kind of it goes into that almost entirely.
Do you think is it because Candyman is ahead of the audience? They never give us like a moment where Candyman is like, I don't know, at his altar and he's talking to the baby, even telling what he wants to do. We don't have that. We don't know that he's killing all these people around her to basically shut her out from her whole life so that she'll eventually become his bride.
Right, yeah.
We don't know that's happening. We're just seeing him kill people.
Yeah, I think
that's what's weird about it.
Like you said, Jamie, the structure, and we can get into it later, but I think the structure informs why it feels so weird.
Yeah, and maybe it's partially to these deleted scenes or something.
Yeah, it could be.
Maybe it was... You know, because if you had that dance scene, and you had all these other things, that might make the movie feel more Beauty and the Beast and less like a quick taste of Beauty and the Beast, a quick taste of something else. And then, you know, it might feel different. So
everyone involved who made the movie wanted that to be there and to be what the movie was. But the studio had problems with like the mixed race. I mean, even in 1991, how lame is this? The mixed race relationship was the deciding factor of.
They had a problem with literally everything.
Yeah,
they had a problem with Tony Todd and the location and everything.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think. I think around 1991 was when Jungle Fever came out in a Spike Lee's movie, and that, you know, just that you could have a movie about a interracial relationship, you know, was a that was the selling point of that story, was how unique it was.
That's true about it's hard to think about that. I mean, that was not that long ago. It's hard to think that like how rigid. You know,
well, yeah, I hate to inform you, Jimmy, but that was 30 years ago.
I know.
Remember that too. It was 30 years ago.
I wasn't even born then.
Jamie's only 26 years old, so. Yeah, no, even it's funny how like what the movie's about. It was still plaguing the actual movie being made about the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah,
the tone deafness
of it is incredible, right?
But I guess I can jump back into the questionnaire.
Yeah, no, yeah, please.
Yeah, no. So there's only a couple more. So the next question, when constructing horror, your horror story, is how can your hero and villain represent opposing sides of that sin? So we kind of answered that in our discussion. Pretty much, Helen is like born into privilege just by being, compared to everybody else, compared to Candyman, just by being white. And her apartment building, I love this touch that her apartment building is exactly the same, like, as the Cabrini Green apartments in its construction. It just happens to be on the white side of town. And
she's built her like castle is built on the ashes of the people who've been oppressed. And it's just by nature of where she was born makes her the opposing side, like she has the same apartments as them, but because of where she was born in the states, where her place in the world, her apartment is nicer and her life is safer, and she doesn't have to deal with the, all the hardships that the people in Cabrini Green do. And then Candyman, I mean, he's obvious, like he is a representation of all the oppressed people in the story, and I think past and present. To some degree, also, like you could say that it's not Candyman, but her best friend exemplifies her privilege and her how she's opposite from Candyman in the way that she's like, you shouldn't be doing this. Stop. And she just thinks she's able to do anything she wants because she's who she is. She can, she doesn't respect it. But her friend is kind of the voice of reason and the voice of that. It's like, you should not keep going in. You should not go into this hole.
Right. She has
we
that
shouldn't be here. This is not okay. I'm telling you.
Yeah, that Helen couldn't have that perspective that she has.
Right. I mean, you're not going to have Candyman say those lines. Right. No. Yeah. So like you need somebody to say it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's we've covered everything else that I was going to bring up on the questionnaire. I mean, we in our just riffing back and forth. So if anybody listening wants that, I'll be happy to send you a PDF. I think it's a really good exercise and it's helped a lot of my clients kind of like hone in on the horror story they're trying to tell and make it like very specific.
For just $49.95.
$49.95.
That PDF can be yours.
Jimmy has his own infomercial. Click on his YouTube channel. But I think, and also, I know we've already talked about it, but let's get into what does make this movie kind of odd. And I think it's because of, Bernard Rose, but it's the structure, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
It's not the clearest movie in that regard.
It's a weird one. And when I first saw it back in the 90s, I wasn't like a huge fan of it. I thought it was okay, but I thought it was I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate why I didn't like it then. I probably just said it sucked. No, I didn't think it sucked. But I now I realize it is a weird, it has this. Back then, I'm trying to figure out where my mindset would be. Back then, I probably would have said the lame thing that you hear, like it wasn't scary or something like that. It didn't scare me. And I think there's some interesting things going on in this movie now that I watch it now, and I like it a much better now than I did back then. I appreciate the weirdness, the oddness of it.
It's more mature than probably what you were expecting at that age.
Yeah, I was probably expecting Nightmare on Elm Street to an extent, and I got this thing, and this thing was different. This thing had mixtures of gothic horror. It had kind of a slower build before it really got to the horror movie aspects. It was just different. So in this particular movie, and I almost wonder, like I always wanted to write like a monster in the house book because we talked about in The Conjuring 3? Was it The Conjuring
The
3?
Devil Made Me Do It. Yeah.
Devil Made Me Do It. We talked about kind of that was a procedural horror movie. And this movie isn't procedural, but it's something else that's very Lovecraftian. It's the investigator, investigating a mystery with some dread slowly creeping in horror movie. And I'm trying to think of what other ones. Can you think of other movies? I mean, the reason Blair isn't quite that is the lock-in, which I'll talk about in 1 second. So the moment where the story really gets locked together, where the hero has a goal, there's stakes and an obstacle in the way. I think the lock-in in Blair happens earlier, that it becomes a survival movie. Mm-hmm. So the setup is investigation, but it quickly becomes we're trapped in a haunted location and we need to survive.
But Jamie, would you, I don't know, for you asked the question about a movie that reminds you of that.
Mm-hmm.
This is a weird one to pull, but maybe From Hell. Do you guys remember From Hell, the Hughes Brothers film? From Hell?
Yeah, Jack Ripper.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. Like, it's not revealed what exactly is happening until the end. And
right. Based on the Alan Moore graphic novel.
Yeah, directed by the Hughes brothers.
There's movies like that because of that, they don't have that immediate urgency. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's the weird thing about this movie. So let's just super quick, let's talk about lock-ins. And, I define lock-ins as the moment where a hero has a goal, there's an obstacle in the way, and if they don't get that goal, something bad will happen. So in the Blair Witch Project, after that group of people, their goal after they get locked in, after they get lost, is to get out. I mean, that's their goal. It's to survive and get out. The obstacle is the curse of the woods or the Blair Witch itself and the stakes of their lives. In this movie, what is it? What do you think it is? What do you think the lock-in is? What do you think the goal, obstacle, stakes is? I have my opinion, but what do you think?
For me, I think the lock-in doesn't even become until Candyman connects with her.
Yep.
And that's 50 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, it's really late.
What scene is that specifically that you guys are saying?
The parking garage.
The parking garage, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just making sure.
Yeah. Helen, I can't.
Yeah.
I'd even argue that you could say it's almost the psychiatrist's office scene.
That's even later. Yeah.
Because that almost feels like when she totally gets what is going on. It's right in front of her face.
You could in a different movie, the Candyman in the parking lot would be the catalyst. Mm-hmm. Then there would be is this real? Do I really have to deal with this? And then when it becomes real, like the psychiatrist scene, that's the lock-in in a different movie. So I'm being a little generous by saying
it's not really clear, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's
vague. Once she realizes, oh, this is the thing, and I have to deal with it. Also, once she does realize that, she really doesn't have anything she does. She's not like a proactive protagonist at that point. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have a lot of agency. She just kind of rides the curse in some ways.
Yeah, she's trying to orient herself most of the time.
Yeah.
Also, there is the element of the fact that the movie kind of, at some points, almost suggests maybe she is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I find that interesting. It adds another layer to this whole thing, but there's moments where the movie's almost suggesting, oh, maybe she's just killing people herself, like the rest of the characters think. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Maybe he is a figment. It's not clear.
It's funny. The back end of this reminded me of The Invisible Man a little bit. You remember Invisible Man, where the thing was killing people and she kept getting blamed. You're the one. So it reminded me of that a little bit. But anyway,
gaslighting is there.
The gaslighting aspect. So that's why this movie is odd if you try to break it into the usual structures, because I think the way some people in a vacuum, I'm kind of a purist when it comes to lock-ins and the way I do it. I think some people would say the first act, I don't know, it probably ends somewhere, investigation, or it's something like when she goes through when she sees the graffiti on the wall and stuff like that, and Sweets to the Sweets and stuff like that. And that they'd say, oh, that's the break into two. She realizes there's more to Candyman than just, she hears the story about or she finds the mirror and stuff like that. Anyway, I think some people would choose that as the break into two. But then that's what that says is your Fun and Games, the movie you came to see, is about a woman investigating whether an urban legend is real or not. And that kind of tells you that the supernatural stuff can't start yet. It starts later because maybe it's not real. And the other problem I have with that, there's no real stakes there. Like, what if she quits? What if she just says, hey, you know what? I just got beat up by these gangsters. I'm done.
Yeah.
So
the stakes don't come in until he says, I'm going to kill this baby, which is the parking garage.
The parking garage, which is why it's the lock-in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm challenging it only for the audience. The stakes are already there because she said the name in the mirror 5 times.
That's true.
We are ahead of her on
superior
that.
Position.
We have the superior position to know that it's coming, whether she wants it to or not. So that might be what sustains it, Jamie, even though she doesn't know it. You know what I mean?
Agree.
She could quit. She could quit, but he's coming. He's coming. Oh, Lord, he's coming. You know what I mean? Like, not stopping.
So I agree. That's the thing that plants the dread, because we've seen movies and we know if, Chekhov's gun, if Chekhov's gun is shown, it's going to go off. So we know that that's there. So that does provide tension and allows us to flip the page. I do think that's part of the engine. And then when she does this investigation, we're looking around the corners and waiting for the monster to show up. So, and that, when we get to the next part, which we'll talk about in a second, the different types of things. You have dread, you have terror, and you have gross out, right? They're the 3 main ingredients in a horror. So that provides dread, which is really the backbone of the beginning part of this movie. There are a couple jump scares, but for the most part, it's the dread that we get in the beginning of this movie that gets us through that section.
Right. You're just waiting and waiting for him to show up. They just keep ratcheting that.
And also just not even waiting for him to show up. You're waiting to know what he's going to do.
Right.
It's you don't really know what he's going to do. Like,
and what I'd say, for better or worse, horror movies do this sometimes. They do this thing where they have really late lock-ins. I think
slow burn. It's like that's why it's a slow burn. Yeah.
Like even a movie like Alien. I mean, is the Fun and Games the guy has a thing in his stomach before it bursts, or is it the Fun and Games after it bursts?
Right.
It's like that's the late lock-in. Jurassic Park. There's a whole section of just the awe of like dinosaurs and stuff.
Yeah.
The monsters really don't get loose till later in the game. They kind of come later. So horror does do this. There's especially independent horror. There's a slow burn kind of thing that happens, and then the midpoint it ramps up and really escalates and takes off.
And the audience is fine with it.
Yeah, and I think it's the dread aspect. I think it's usually the filmmaker or the writer seeing how far they can stretch that dread, because they know that once you bring Tony Todd out there and he's like, I've come for you, you can't, the dread knob doesn't work as well. It's a little bit like, now our heart's pumping and we've seen the monster.
You've seen the shark, and now
yep.
Got to fight the shark. Right.
Exactly. No, and then other movies kill people in the shadows, and that's kind of how it keeps the dread engine going and going and going. It's like, this movie doesn't do that as really. I guess so, maybe
it's more of a directing thing, but it's odd to me that the psychiatrist kill happens on screen.
Yes.
And the other kills don't. That's not really I guess it's not a writing thing as much, but it's odd that
it kind of is. Yeah.
It goes like directly blunt.
I think it's a writing thing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, she has to see it. And then the other ones are whatever her perception is, she can't see it. But for us, it's odd just from like a horror movie aspect. Like, here's this brutal slaying of this psychiatrist, and then he kind of kills people off screen for a while.
Right.
I think it's pretty. I think it's escalation. I mean,
I'm not saying it's bad.
It's another part of the building. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad. It's just you would think it would build up to that, to seeing it, but
it's funny too, because I was thinking about the monster in the house genre. So these save the cat genres. And the monster in the house has three things. So we talked about one. It has a sin that brings about the monster. It has a house and it has a monster. And the house is the trap. It's really the trap. And in this movie, the trap doesn't really show up for sure until late in the game. So the question is this even a monster in the house genre?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the midpoint just an escalation? Is this like a golden fleece about a person trying to get to the bottom of the mystery or something?
That's why it flows differently than your average horror movie, because like the patterns of the story are not like typical.
That's right. Like a typical horror movie, she says Candyman, some weird stuff starts happening, break into two. It's more like The Ring, or something like that. She knows, she gets the phone call. I'm next in The Ring. Because this is kind of like a curse movie as well. I mean, this mixes so many things. It's got the investigation. It's got the curse. It's got the gothic Beauty and the Beast thing in the back end. It's like all of them. I won't say they seamlessly work together. They seem
and it's interesting. I see a lot of people label this as a slasher movie.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with.
It's not.
And that's like another thing I see. In revisiting this, I was just kind of looking up some of the stuff they were referencing on the DVD extras, and just like seeing it labeled as a slasher over and over again, and why people responded the way they did, because they went into it as a slasher. I think
1990s me probably went into it as a slasher.
There you go.
But,
there you go. Maybe it was a marketing label.
What's the difference though? Jason will kill you if you're in the room with him. That's what his motivation is. You're a human being and you're alive and you need to be dead. But you watch this movie and no one dies without purpose. They all died tangentially to Helen for a reason. It's not a slasher to me because of that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a slasher.
Because the murders have a purpose. He's cutting her off from her own life. So yeah, it's not because he needs I don't know, he needs their blood, or because he fetishizes it, or they have to all pay. It's because of her. Right.
Agreed.
Doesn't read as slasher to me.
Me neither.
Yeah. I'm agreeing with you with too many words. That's what I'm doing.
Right. So yeah, anyway, so that's to me why this movie is such an odd one to analyze in some ways. And
what would you call the house even? It was weird to me because like
Cabrini
I
Green?
remember and you would think that, right? But like it's sort of like Dr. Sleep. We talked about the house is their mind.
Dr. Sleep came to mind to me. I think I view it as, it depends on how you want to judge it. Because like saying Candyman 5 times is kind of the trap, right? Once you say it, you're cursed. He's in your life and he's not going away, and he doesn't have rules like we have rules. So you're basically screwed. So that's the trap. How do you get away from Candyman that can show up anywhere, and it's kind of arbitrary in some ways, because he does show up anywhere. He shows up outside of that place, outside of the haunted house.
Exactly.
So I view it more as a curse. Like in The Ring, that's what the trap is. So it's not quite that it's psychological, and that's why I always call it a trap as opposed to a house. Like what's the trap? What's the thing they can't escape? And you could say it's the monster, and that kind of works in this one.
So it's like a caught in the trap story.
Yeah.
And what is the literal or figurative trap?
Yeah, like Nightmare on Elm Street, the trap is sleeping. Like you always have to sleep, and you can't get away. You can't escape sleeping. Yeah. So that's kind of the trap.
I love it.
I think this one, it's just sort of it's just the rules of a curse.
Conjuring him. Yeah.
Yeah. You're trapped in the curse, just like The Ring you're trapped by that curse. There's also no way to escape it.
Do you think there's also elements of a possession movie in this too? Like, there, you know what I mean?
That's why I was asking the house being the mind as well. Because like
I said earlier too, like it does frame it like he's almost working through her hand, and the other characters are like she's this murderous killer now. And we're questioning how these murders are. I'm even like saying, like, did he just use her hands to kill these people?
Because, like, at the lock-in, she's sort of he invades her mind, you know, like
who cut the dog's head off? Right. Was it her? Did she actually cut that dog's head off because he was possessing her mind? Or did he show up and hook it off?
They leave it ambiguous.
They leave it ambiguous, but I'm saying there's elements of possession here.
There is
mind, you know.
There is a version of this you can interpret almost all the killings as it is just her mind. Like she went mad and she sees it as Candyman killing people, but she's actually killing people and this often happens in these movies, as we've seen in Nightmare on Elm Street, until the end, because she's dead and she couldn't kill, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So kind of sometimes they cap it off with some kill that kind of invalidates the theory in some ways. But I almost never count the end. I'm like, okay, the end's fine. I get it. Carrie's hand comes out of the grave, but I'm going to analyze from the beginning on. I'm not going to count that. If I reboot this 20 years from now, I'll pretend that didn't happen. We'll see if that happens when we watch the next one.
We'll watch the next one if Helen is a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I could totally see this interpreted as psychological. So therefore, it could be the mind. But I'm sure a lot of people watch this movie and don't even think about that part of it at all. They're just like, definitely, it's definitively.
I wouldn't have if we didn't do this show.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have digged that deep to think like, wait, is she actually using her own hands? I've never asked that before. We'll watch.
It feels like we need to make a dumb YouTube video. Like,
no, thank you.
Helen did it. Theory.
Like the apartment scene. I'm like, did he put all that blood on her? Because she's in another room, and then she walks out and the dog's head is hacked off. I was like, did he like pour blood on her while she was passed out? What happened here is like that kind of.
That's why it's scary, man.
That's why it's scary because we don't know. The unknown is insane. Yeah.
And I see horror. We were going to talk about horror techniques, and we kind of been bringing them up. They just come up. So the 3 horror techniques, and this kind of spins off of something Stephen King once said, but we've kind of paraphrased it for our own purposes. It's kind of like dread, terror, and gross out. So, and it's funny. I did a tweet the other day. I said, dread is when you're waiting for the email to come back that says they passed on your screenplay. Terror is the actual email. So that's the difference between the two. So dread is waiting for the monster to jump out and kill you. And terror is the monster jumping out and attacking, seeing the monster. And this movie uses a lot of dread up front in order to keep things going, because again, like we said, the monster really doesn't show up till late. There's a couple like when the gangsters show up and the guy who calls himself Candyman, it's kind of a fake out. They do some fake outs. And then once the monster shows up, the problem is then you have to almost reset. You have to reset the dread, because once you kind of pop the balloon, so to speak, you got to blow it up again. And it's not as, it doesn't make the audience as uneasy like after you pop the balloon, because then they're laughing and they're hiding their eyes and they're kind of coming back and their heart's racing. So it's harder to get them back once you scare them, but you do have to scare them. You can't just, there are movies that just do dread pretty much, and they're just the constant dread. We've talked about this before. I've gotten many notes that people count the scare beats nowadays. It's just this weird thing that happens. It's a lot like a Whammo board that back in the day when they looked for action scenes every 10 pages. Now they look for scare beats every 10 pages. So you need that hook coming through the mirror or something like that. You can't just get away with this anymore. It's at least once you get to the studio level, honestly, I wish I didn't say this, but I've had people come back to me and say, we need more scare beats. I've had people try to hire me to do scare beat passes to add scare beats. It's a weird thing that happens. I wouldn't worry too much about it. But if you're trying to make a commercial horror movie and you're really thinking like, I want to do something like A Quiet Place or The Conjuring or something like that, then you might want to worry about it and just make sure you have them all throughout the story. You have true scare beats that make people jump. If you're doing something that is your own voice, probably the type of thing you should do, your own voice, It's different. It's something only you can write. Maybe you don't worry about it as much. You know, maybe you just do your own thing. And if you're the weird dread writer, then you're the weird dread writer, and they'll hire you to do the Dread movie. You know, not Judge Dredd. But
I was trying not to make that joke, Jamie.
Yes.
I was like, don't make that joke.
You know, it's when I kept saying the Dread movie. But, but this movie uses a lot of them. So things like the hook coming through the mirror and things like that, or the true slasher scenes, they're the terror beats.
Yeah.
And then that kind
even the B reveal, his chest. I feel like that's ultimate terror right there.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And they've got the massive gross out ones. I mean, even just the shit on the walls in the bathroom is a gross out horror of Sweets to the Sweet written in shit on the walls.
Yeah.
And the Bernadette, the shot of Bernadette blue with like just gutted, that's a gross out. I mean, there's some great gross out moments in this movie for sure that are equally effective.
Even just showing his arm is gross out, right? Yeah.
You know what? You know what's interesting, and tell me what you think about this. When I was growing up, gross outs were almost like the cheeseburger. They were almost more important than terror and dread. I think that shifted. I think gross outs are kind of a little
shifted for you or in culture.
In culture,
they're treated like the jump scares, except for the core horror audience.
Right, like I could see.
So your core horror audience wants the gore.
Right.
Yeah.
I could see the studio people back in the 80s probably saying, "Oh, this needs 10 more gross outs."
This kind of goes back to our discussion on our Hereditary episode with the elevated horror label, right? Like
they call it prestige now, don't
prestige
they?
Horror. I don't know.
Prestige horror.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've heard that.
Right.
But what you're saying is like they're aiming for that feel, that vibe, that tone.
Mainly dread.
Yeah. More than guts.
I grew up in the 80s, so I still tend to put some gross outs in my stuff.
Yeah, dude.
I tend to be kind of cruel. Like I try to like take it to the next level sometimes. But it's not as popular as it was. But the scare beats, which aren't gross out beats necessarily, sometimes they mix.
A mix,
They're a little different. They're a little different.
I mean, when he kills the psychiatrist, there's a giant spray of blood,
right,
and stuff. I mean, that counts, right? That's a gross out.
Yeah.
Yep.
The last thing I think that we really should cover is theme. Which is a difficult question for this movie, right?
I put this, and I wanted to talk about this because I have a tough time cracking the theme in this, because I think when I listen to people talk about this movie and why this movie was important to them, a lot of it is the racial undertones, the prejudice, the kind of enlightening some of that stuff, and that's definitely there. But this movie is strange in that it has several themes. You know, it's got the urban legend belief kind of theme that she's investigating, her thesis, like, and with Tony Todd, like, I mean, he emphasizes that whole thing, like about the disbelief and join me and all that stuff, and the kind of love story. So there's a lot of scattered
and like
in there that, and I have trouble identifying the true theme, the one theme of this movie. I think it's got like 3 different things it's doing all at once. It's like 3 different movies all at once, and each one has its own theme. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think this movie has anything central? Like, I always look at
so we're talking from solely a writing standpoint. Like you were saying, you're talking about there is like a socio-political theme here.
Absolutely.
We're talking about writing.
The message, right? The lesson the character learns.
It's important for
the
those
lesson the audience is supposed to bring away from the story.
And
from
part of
the
the
actual
reason
writing,
through the writing.
Part of the reason I even wanted to discuss this is because I know we're gonna in the future do the new Candyman movie.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that does some different things with the theme. I think by putting the main character, who she is and what her journey is, and it goes back to her husband and the cheating and choosing Candyman and sacrificing and saving the baby. Like, what is her journey?
And then becoming a candy woman.
She becomes oppressed. She becomes violated and lynched. She sort of experiences over the course of the story isolation and loneliness and all the things that Candyman experienced in his suffering by story's end. So she kind of just learns what it is to be Candyman. Right?
Or can I even go further and say she learns what it is to not be privileged?
Right.
Like she actually learns what it's like to live as those people in a very short amount of time. Like
and in a very extreme way.
A very extreme way.
Yes.
Right.
So, and that's measurable, right? It's not hammering it in your face, but it is measurable.
Could the theme be something as simple?
For me, it's really hard. Like I don't
like. What if you take into account the very ending, which I know you're saying, Jamie, you don't necessarily, but it could be history repeats itself.
I mean, there's something there.
You know what I mean? Because it's just a cycle. Like
I was gonna say, like our hatred breeds monsters.
Yeah, hatred.
Our like our mistreatment of others breeds monsters. Something like that. I mean, that's kind of like all urban legends.
and the truth is that what Helen learns? Like because that's really where I track it in some ways.
Yeah, no.
What is she? What is the Helen in the end? How is she?
I think
she didn't die, or I'm not saying she's supernatural.
The Helen at the beginning would have still saved that baby. I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't doubt that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Bob. There is
so like
the arc isn't there.
I think
communicate a theme. Like
isn't that what Jamie's asking? Yeah. Is like.
Yeah.
What is different about Helen? And I'm like, I think she still would have crawled that baby out of that fire at her own demise.
Here's a question though. Would she have investigated? Would she have done the things she did in the beginning? Did she really did she do something wrong in the beginning? Was her questioning and investigation a thing that needed fixing?
Yeah, exactly.
Did she
yes.
Here's
because she was doing it for her own academic gain and maybe her own even fame. So who knows what that paper? She wasn't doing it to correct the problem of Cabrini Green.
There you go.
That is the
there
sin.
You go.
And here's where I was going to go with that, and I'm kind of workshopping it with you. So the three arcs that we always talk about, right? Now I can never remember them when I'm on the spot.
You put yourself on the spot.
I know it's so weird because I have one of them, and the one is the one I think this is, and that is to care more. Right. I think she cares more about the bigger picture.
People and they're
not as selfish.
Yes.
And now I can't remember the other one. I know the one is the family that we added, like learning to work together. Care more and
believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself. Yeah, believe in yourself.
She kind of gets a little bit of that too, I think, by the end. I don't know that she ever stands up to her husband or if that's even important by the time she gets to her husband. It's like,
her husband is just a thing that she has to lose. She needed something to lose she lost her friend.
Push her over the edge.
Yeah, that was the last thing.
Yeah,
last
her marriage.
Yes. Yeah.
You're right though. I agree with what you said, Jamie.
I mean, the one thing I wanted to ask you that I'm thinking of now that we're workshopping this is, Jamie, how do you define a tragedy? And is there a lesson there through the tragic end?
So usually tragedy, the way I define it, and this is kind of the moral premise. There's a book called The Moral Premise that enlightened me to this idea. And I view tragedy as somebody that should arc, but doesn't. And therefore bad things happen to them. And I don't think that's really what happens.
That's not what happens here.
So it's
okay,
good.
Like
they should learn the lesson. They don't, and therefore they die or the horrible things happen, and because they never learn.
So is it nihilistic then? Because she learns the lesson, but she still dies.
It could be a little nihilistic. I mean, is there any better?
I guess Candyman is a nihilistic figure, right? Like he didn't do anything wrong, and he still was like tortured and murdered.
You know why it doesn't feel nihilistic? I mean, this is sad, but because of their love for each other.
Yeah.
It feels like, well, they were destined to be together.
Yeah, that's true. There's meaning there, I guess.
Did she really ever choose that though? I mean, he keeps
not on screen.
Yeah,
but there was in the script, and they shot her actually choosing that.
See,
so it's interesting.
I think if she ended up choosing that, then we could track why she makes that choice, and maybe it wouldn't be nihilistic in some ways. But presented as we seem, she's forced to make that choice.
Yeah,
she has no choice.
Her down. He's beating her down. Yeah,
absolutely.
He killed everyone around her.
Yeah.
And her husband. She lost her husband. I think
because of that.
Well, she lost her husband because of that, but I don't agree, Jimmy. She lost her husband normally as herself.
Right.
So the one thing that she did have that has no connection to Candyman, she failed. And so that was the actual push she needed. I think if Candyman just slaughtered her husband, the story would be different.
Good point.
She had to lose her husband to her own relationship failings before any of this started. What she did. We're shown in the classroom, he's already cheating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
from the start. Yeah.
From the start. Like it didn't have anything to do with Candyman. He was gone.
That's right. Yeah.
It was going to happen. So
in some ways it plots her path of being a naive kind of person, both in her thesis and in her love life, and thinking she has this kind of world, thinking the world she's in is real, and then finding out the world she's in isn't real at all. Both her marital life and the thing she's investigating that she thinks is all fun and games until it turns real and bites her in the ass.
And her her safe, white working class life is an illusion because look how these people across the street are living.
Yeah.
She finds that out, and it's not an easy one to put on paper.
There's stuff there that we can easily pull out of it, though, for sure.
Yeah. There's maybe having all that is what makes it so compelling. But I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah.
Candyman 1992. And
I love that we were trying to figure a lot of this out because that's how the movie is.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's loose.
I watched it twice because the first time I watched it, I was like, I didn't realize how hard this would be to talk about. When we said Candyman, I was like, it's a slam dunk.
Same. And
it's a very odd discussion. But do we have anything? We have already promised that we're going to come back for the next episode and do Candyman 2021.
Yes, we've never done that before.
We've never done that. We never followed it with a original and then the reboot or the sequel.
And when we do, we can keep this discussion in mind a little bit, which will be a lot of fun.
Which I like that we're doing the 1-2.
I know, and none of us have seen it. This is great.
Yeah, I like how pure we're going into this. None of us have seen it. So until then, do we have you guys have anything you want to plug?
Nah, I'm good.
Nothing.
I'm good.
In that case, I think that's it, gentlemen.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, see you on the next Candyman episode.
Bye-bye.
You have just listened to Writer's Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring two professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.